Welcome. Lesson 1.1 of Unit 1 is the structure of water and hydrogen bonding. And this is great if you're trying to review properties of water as it relates to AP biology or the first college biology course. Let's take a look at the overall structure of water, which you see on the right-hand side here. But let's try to review how it's actually formulated or how it comes to be. First of all, if you remember in chemistry, or if you don't remember in chemistry, you have in water the term H2O, or two hydrogens for every one oxygen. Now, that's important to note that for water, you have two hydrogens and one oxygen for every atom. But let's take a look deeper. The structure of oxygen has 6 electrons in its valence shell. So if you remember how you go about creating that structure is you do the 4 round. So you have O in the center and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Please note, as a disclaimer, for any sort of biology class, you won't really need to memorize by heart the valence shell that it has 6 electrons on the outside of oxygen, but this will help to understand why the shape is actually the way that it is. So for oxygen, you have oxygen in the center, and you have these 2 electrons that are centered, while you have these 2 pairs. Those pairs sort of pair off essentially. And the 2 lone electrons will go ahead and bond to H, or both the H's. And that's how you end up getting the shape right here, which this important fact is necessary to know for AP biology or college biology. While you also need to know that water is composed of 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen, you'll also know that the shape is bent. B-E-N-T. So it's not linear, it is bent, which means that it forms this sort of like upside down V structure because of those 2 pairs of electrons on the outside, and it sort of formulates this sort of like bubble-like shape that sort of formulates that bent shape. So 2 facts you'll need to know, just to recap for the structure of water, is that it is composed of 2 hydrogens for every 1 oxygen, and it formulates a bent shape.
Let's talk about polarity of water. Now, when we talk about polarity, it means that we have opposite charges, and water has a tendency to do that. Let's take a look at the following water molecule here. Now, when we're looking at this water molecule, you see the oxygens here and the 2 hydrogens side by side. Now, it's important to note that with this picture, that you're looking at the hydrogens and the oxygens, and they have different symbols attached to them, either pluses or minuses. So what does that mean? While you don't need to know for AP biology what exactly the pluses and minuses are, it helps to better understand what polarity actually is. First of all, hydrogen has a plus charge. So both of those have plus charges, and that's because the element hydrogen is on the left side of the periodic table. So anything on the left side of the periodic table has a more positive charge or plus charge. The oxygen, which is located on the right side of the periodic table, has a tendency to be more negative. And so that's why the oxygen has a negative charge. What this means is that there's this push-pull or tendency for the positives to be pulled towards the oxygen. And this is what creates what we call a dipole moment. Because there's this push-pull between the positives and the negatives, they create this very interesting characteristic that allows us to realize that there is polarity. So water in general is a polar molecule, as we can see in the structure here, because it has some positive and some negative charge. Now, because it is polar, it's important to note the idea of what water really attracts in general.
Hydrogen bonding.
There is hydrophilic versus hydrophobic properties. So, hydrophobic is water fearing. So, a better way to think about it is understanding the term hydrophilic. If you think of the word hydrophilic, you often think of the word Philadelphia. And when I think of this Philadelphia, I think of the city of brotherly love. So water displays hydrophilic properties, which means that it is hydro, water, philic, loving properties. Oil, on the other hand, does the direct opposite. And in the picture on the left-hand side, we see exactly what happens when oil mixes with water. See, while water might be polar, oil is nonpolar, and it is actually hydrophobic. If you think of the word phobia, you think of the word fear. So oil is water phobic or hydrophobic and water fearing. And that's why when we mix both water and oil, it separates its components together. Now, for the AP biology exam, you also want to note that hydrogen bonds are very weak. That's why they can break down very easily, and that's what's going to define their properties, which we'll talk about in a second. For the definition of hydrogen bonding, if you see a molecule and you see any sort of hydrogen element attached to F, fluorine, oxygen, or nitrogen, those are what we considered hydrogen bonding. So hydrogen attached to C, for example, is not considered hydrogen bonding. So that's imperative to note that when you see these three elements, fluorine, oxygen, and nitrogen, attached to a hydrogen, that's what we consider hydrogen bonding. To look at the different properties of water. To note, there are approximately 6 main properties of water, and for any AP biology exam, you want to know them in full detail, including the terms and the definitions or what they really mean, because you can get a free response question that asks you something related to properties of water, and you're expected to know the common properties of water and their meaning behind it, which is what we're going to review today. First, let's review cohesion. So cohesion is the ability for water to like water. So in this picture here, you see one water molecule and another water molecule, and they're best friends here. And what does that really mean in terms of water? Well, water has very strong cohesion forces, and that means that it likes to stick together to other water molecules. So let's take a look at this plant here. And usually a plant is in the root, and we like to water a plant. So if we have our water pitcher here and we're dropping water, we put that in the root. Well, how does it go from the root to the tip, especially with gravity? What happens is the water molecules that are in the ground, one will float up and carry another water molecule till it goes from root to tip. So that's because of the strong cohesion, and those strong cohesion forces are present to allow water molecules to like other water molecules. Now that we've gone over cohesion, let's go over the second property, which is adhesion. So adhesion allows water molecules to be attracted to other things. For example, if you see the picture on the left here, there's a windowsill. And if you ever try to wipe down a windowsill, you might see leftover water particles and the shadow of the water particles on that windowsill. And that's usually because of adhesion. The water on the glass surface likes to remain on the glass surface or adhere to it. And that's why we see water droplets. That's called adhesion. About surface tension, which is a very unique property of water. And it's a very interesting property because it really talks about the surface of water. So if we take a look at the surface of water, a lot of items can stay on that surface because surface tension. If you look at this bug here, it's not falling through the water, and that's because of surface tension. The cohesive forces that lay on that surface are very difficult to break. Another example is in the background here. You see there's a leaf or some plants that are relaying their surface. They're on the surface. And That's because of surface tension. That very strong bond in the surface of any water surface is going to be really hard to break. Now, when we talk about specific heat, we're talking about the ability for water to either change temperature. And what happens is water has a very high specific heat, so it can absorb or release a large amount of heat with only a small change in temperature. So, an example of this, or an easy way to think about this, is think about a glacier. A glacier is located in a very cold area, but you can have a glacier, which is water, and then you can also have a lake nearby, which also is water. Now, the reason why both can be simultaneously in the same location is because of specific heat. It takes a really high temperature for that glacier to then melt into water. That's why we don't see glaciers melt overnight. It takes some period of time to do so. The same thing can be said for other bodies of water of too. Because it is a large sum of water, it takes, for example, liquid water to then turn into gas. It will take some time for that to occur. Let's take a look at another property such as evaporative cooling. So this is what happens when we depend on water to change the surface temperature. An example of this could be sweating. So if you're sweating, you are releasing warm water essentially, but you're doing this so your body can convert that sweat and perspiration into vapor, which then cools you down as a human being. So that is the property of evaporative cooling. So in opposite or another additional property is the dissociation of water. So dissociation of water is the idea that you can shift one water molecule into another. So if you remember the shape of H2O, we have two water molecules here. When a water molecule dissociates, it dissociates into hydronium, H3O, and it can also dissociate to hydroxide or OH minus. And this is important to note because it can really dictate pH levels in general. Let's talk about the dissociation of water as it comes to the understanding of pH and pOH. As you can see on the right here, we have a scale, a pH scale, and it lets us know the ranges of pH. When it comes to pH, pH can range from 1 to 14. So when we talk about pH, it could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., all the way up to 14. What you need to understand when it comes to water, we think of water as being very neutral, which means that it registers near or around the value of 7. So that is neutral. If it's less than 7, we say that it is more acidic. If it's greater than 7, we say that it is more basic or alkaline. So when we talk about acidity, we're talking about the level of H concentration, so the H pluses. And if we're talking about being more basic or alkaline, we're talking about the OH concentration. When we're talking about OH concentration more specifically, we're talking about hydroxide. So basic equals hydroxide or OH. Acidic, the value that's less than 7, is going to be talking about hydrogen ions. Now, while the standardized test of AP biology won't ask you more chemistry related questions because pH does fall under the category, they do ask you sometimes to see if you understand the concept of pH as it relates to water. They do provide you the following formula. pH equals negative log H concentration. So you are expected to know some things. The first thing that you need to know is that if we're talking about pH and the value goes up, that means that the H concentration goes down. And if you were to take a look at our chart here, that makes more sense. For example, if our value of pH becomes more positive, it ranges more in the alkaline concentration, which means that you're going to have more of an OH concentration rather than an H concentration. And vice versa, if you have a POH concentration and that were to go down, that would be inversely proportional to the OH concentration. So to recap again, what that means is if pH goes up, our hydrogen concentration goes down. If our pH actually goes down, our H concentration would go up. And also inversely, if our POH, I should say, concentration goes up, then our OH concentration would go down. If our POH concentration goes down, then our OH concentration goes up. So you can see here there is a scale to better understand the concept seen here. So now we're going to go and try to mimic this scenario. But before we do that, let's review the summary of water properties. This screen here just shows the overall comprehension of what we went over, which is cohesion. Just as a reminder, that's when water molecules tend to stick together. Adhesion, this is when water molecules stick to other objects. Surface tension is the ability of water to hold strong and steady on the top layer. We often equate that to like a bug being able to walk on water. High heat capacity, that idea that it takes a lot for water to change its states from solid to liquid to gas because it requires a higher temperature and expansion and freezing. That when water expands, when it freezes, it actually floats. So that's why you see objects floating on water essentially. Okay, now that we've reviewed that concept, let's begin our quiz. Just a quick note for AP biology exams, you are allowed a graphing calculator and you are provided a formula sheet. For the concept of water, you'll need to remember that your formula sheet will have that formula related to pH. Let's begin the first question. Take a minute to read this question, pause the video, and then unpause when you're done. Okay, now that you've unpaused the video, let's take a look at this concept. So it talks about the pH value and it's increasing, and they want to figure out what that means for the pH concentration based on all the answer choices. So based on our knowledge, we understand that as pH goes up, our concentration of hydrogen will go down. So it will decrease. pH is related to H concentration. POH is related to OH concentration. Remember, they're inversely related. Off the bat, that means that we're taking a look at something that has decreased because they told us that the pH has increased. Remember, they're inversely related. So option choice A and option choice D would not suffice because they're saying that the concentrations have increased. Now taking a look at B and C, remember pH is related to the H concentration, which would lean our answer towards B rather than C. I also want to point out the value of decreasing by 1/10 versus 10 times. You're moving one decimal place either to the right or to the left when you talk about logarithms, not 10 times. Because it's related to a decimal place, we're going to talk about fractional increases or decreases, leading answer choice B to be the best answer there. So that would mean that our answer would be B. Now, take a look at the following sheet here. This is just a summary as it relates to the exam. Remember that the pH concentration, or actually I should say the pH formula will be given to you. So pH equals negative log of the H concentration. It talks about the relationship between the two, if pH increases by how many times, and the tenfold versus a quarterfold. It is also safe to note that you will be expected to know the other relationships of pOH being the negative log of the OH concentration. It is beneficial to review those for the exam. Now let's take a look at a second question. Which of the following statements are correct about the structure of water and hydrogen bonding? Take a moment, read the question, make sure you pause, and once completed, make sure you unpause the video. Okay, now that you've done reviewing the question, let's try to come up with the answer together. Remember that for the property of water or hydrogen bonding, we know that the shape is bent. And if you remember, we also know a couple of other things. So we know that it is hydrogen bonding is associated with water, and that we have the value of H2O. So just keep those in mind when we're reviewing this answer. So if you take a look at option choice A, they say water molecules are held together by ionic bonds. And that's not true. We mentioned that they're covalent bonds. So option choice A would not be correct. Hydrogen bonding occurs between the hydrogen atom of one water molecule and the oxygen of another water molecule. This is a fair statement because we're talking about the relationship and bonding between hydrogen and oxygen, and it talks about the relationship of how those water molecules stick together. So we're going to put a little check mark there, just ensuring that we come back to the other option choices. Water is linear is the statement given by answer choice C. The problem with that is, if we remember, it has an upside down V shape and therefore is bent. So C would not be a good option. D states that hydrogen bonds in water are stronger than covalent bonds within the same molecule. And we mentioned that they're actually fairly weak. So D would not be a great option. So based on the answer choices given here, B would be our best answer choice. Just a fair reminder as we're reviewing these answer choices that sometimes you might find yourself toggling between two option choices, and that's fair to recognize. You want to ensure that you review all your answer choices before making your final selection, like we chose with B, because you want to ensure that you're choosing the best answer for any standardized test, especially an AP biology exam, because sometimes you could have two answer choices that are very similar, but you have to choose the best one of the two. So I hope that helps. The final answer was B, and I hope to see you guys soon. Thank you so much. Hey, you want to know a little secret? If you hit the subscribe button, you'll be able to get up-to-date information related to AP Biology and the digital SAT math test. Making sure that you're able to understand the content is just the first step. So if you want updated additional information, make sure to click the link tree in our bio. We hope that you subscribe because each new subscriber gives us motivation to create more up-to-date content for you, students, parents, and teachers. Enjoy!